The dusty trail stretched endlessly before Martha's weathered wagon, each bump and jolt a reminder that her old life lay buried in the ashes of Charleston. The year was 1847, and the Montana Territory promised nothing but uncertainty to a woman with calloused hands and a heart heavy with secrets. She clutched the crumpled letter that had brought her here, its edges worn smooth from countless readings. Seeking companionship for life on Prairie Ranch. Must be strong, willing worker. Romance not required, but kindness essential. The signature belonged to Samuel Whitmore, a name that meant everything and nothing to her desperate circumstances. As the wagon crested a hill, revealing the sprawling Whitmore Ranch below, Martha felt her breath catch. The main house stood proud against the endless sky, its windows gleaming like watchful eyes in the afternoon sun. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, painting promises of warmth and shelter against the harsh realities of frontier life. But something felt wrong. The silence stretched too long, too deep, broken only by the whisper of wind through tall grass. Where were the ranch hands? Where was the bustle of daily life that should surround such a prosperous spread? Martha's fingers unconsciously traced the hidden pocket sewn into her dress, where her most precious possession lay concealed. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete who had barely spoken 20 words during their 3-day journey, suddenly pulled the horses to a halt. "This is as far as I go, miss," he muttered, refusing to meet her eyes. "You sure about this place?" His weathered hands trembled slightly as he helped her down, and Martha noticed how quickly he departed, his wagon disappearing into a cloud of dust as if fleeing from something unseen. Standing alone in the vast emptiness, Martha gathered her single carpetbag and began the long walk toward the house. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted with the knowledge that there was no turning back. The letter had promised a new beginning, but the closer she drew to the weathered porch, the more she wondered if she had walked into something far more dangerous than poverty. The front door stood slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached, her voice barely a whisper when she called out, "Mr. Whitmore?" "Samuel Whitmore." Silence answered her, thick and oppressive. She pushed the door wider and stepped into the shadowy interior, where dust motes danced in shafts of golden light. The house was beautiful but felt abandoned, as if its occupants had vanished into thin air. Furniture sat covered in white sheets like ghosts, and a grandfather clock in the corner had stopped at precisely 11:37. On the mantelpiece, a daguerreotype showed a handsome man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, presumably Samuel Whitmore himself. But where was he? Martha set her bag down carefully, her practical mind already cataloging the inconsistencies. Fresh bread sat on the kitchen table, still warm to the touch. Coffee grounds lay scattered near a tin cup, as if someone had been interrupted mid-preparation. A half-written letter lay open on the desk, its ink still wet enough to smear when she accidentally brushed against it. The words made her blood run cold. She cannot know the truth about Rebecca. If she discovers what really happened that night in September, everything will be lost. Martha's hands shook as she read and reread the cryptic message. Who was Rebecca? What had happened in September? And most importantly, what truth was she not supposed to know? A floorboard creaked behind her, and she spun around to find a tall man silhouetted in the doorway. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud, dark hair falling across eyes that seemed to hold secrets deeper than any well. This had to be Samuel Whitmore, though he looked nothing like the gentle soul she had imagined from his letter. There was something wild about him, something untamed that made her take an involuntary step backward. "You came," he said simply, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and something else she couldn't identify. Fear, perhaps? Or guilt? "I wasn't certain you would." Martha found her voice, though it emerged smaller than she intended. "Your letter said you needed a wife. I needed a home. The arrangement seemed practical for both of us." Samuel studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, as if searching for something specific in her features. "Practical," he repeated slowly. "Yes, I suppose that's what it is." He moved closer, and she caught the scent of leather and something else, something metallic that made her stomach clench. "Did you bring anything with you? Any Reminders of your past life. The question struck her as odd, but Martha shook her head. Only what you see. I left everything behind in Charleston. The lie came easily, her hand unconsciously moving to protect the hidden pocket in her dress. Whatever she was concealing, it was clearly precious enough to risk discovery for. Samuel's eyes followed the gesture, sharp and calculating. Good, he said after a moment. The past has a way of haunting us here in Montana. Best to let sleeping dogs lie. He gestured toward the covered furniture. This was my first wife's house. Rebecca decorated it before she left us. The pause stretched uncomfortably long, filled with implications Martha didn't dare explore. Left? She asked carefully. Samuel's jaw tightened. Died. Rebecca died. But something in his tone suggested the story was far more complicated than a simple death. The way he avoided her eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the careful choice of words all pointed to secrets buried beneath the Montana soil. As evening approached, Samuel showed Martha to what would be her room, a spare bedroom far from the master suite. The arrangement suited her fine, as she had no illusions about love in this marriage of convenience. But as she unpacked her meager belongings, she discovered something that made her heart race. Hidden beneath the mattress was a diary, bound in faded blue leather. The name Rebecca Whitmore was embossed in gold letters across the cover. Martha glanced toward the door, ensuring she was alone, before opening to a random page. The handwriting was delicate but hurried, as if the writer had been racing against time. Samuel grows more suspicious each day. He watches me constantly, follows me to town, questions everyone I speak with. I fear he knows about the letters about my correspondence with James. If he discovers the truth about our plan, about what we intend to do with the money, Martha's blood turned to ice. Money? What money? And who? Opening to a random page. The handwriting was delicate but hurried, as if the writer had been racing against time. Samuel grows more suspicious each day. He watches me constantly, follows me to town, questions everyone I speak with. I fear he knows about the letters about my correspondence with James. If he discovers the truth about our plan, about what we intend to do with the money, Martha's blood turned to ice. Money? What money? And who was James? She flipped to another entry, dated just weeks before Rebecca's supposed death. The gold is safely hidden where Samuel will never find it. Tomorrow night, when the moon is dark, James will come for me. We will take what rightfully belongs to us and disappear forever. Samuel's greed has blinded him to everything except his precious ranch. But I have been planning this for months. The mail-order bride he seeks will never materialize because I have been intercepting his letters, responding as different women to keep him distracted while James and I prepare our escape. Martha's mind reeled with the implications. Rebecca hadn't died at all. She had planned to run away with someone named James, stealing what appeared to be a significant amount of gold. But something had gone wrong. Otherwise, why would Samuel be here now, married to her? She continued reading, her hands trembling with each revelation. Samuel found the letters today. I saw it in his eyes at dinner, the cold fury he tries so hard to hide. He knows about James, knows about our plan. I should run tonight, but the gold is buried beneath the old oak tree behind the barn, and I cannot leave without it. Too much depends on that money. James is waiting for me at Miller's Creek, but I must retrieve our future first. The final entry was dated September 15th, just 2 months ago. He is coming. I can hear his boots on the stairs, slow and deliberate like a death march. The shotgun is in his hands. I should have run when I had the chance, should have trusted my instincts about Samuel's true nature. If someone finds this diary, know that I love James Morrison with all my heart, and that the gold beneath the oak tree belongs to the miners of Silver Creek, stolen from their rightful wages by Samuel's underhanded dealings with the mine foreman. May God forgive us all for what we have done. Martha slammed the diary shut, her heart pounding so hard she feared Samuel might hear it from downstairs. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Samuel hadn't lost his wife to illness or accident. He had murdered Rebecca to prevent her from exposing his theft and running away with her lover. The gold mentioned repeatedly in the diary was stolen money, payment for workers that Samuel had somehow diverted to his own pockets. But if Rebecca was dead, why had Samuel brought Martha here? What purpose did a new wife serve if not to provide companionship and help with the ranch? Unless Martha herself was in danger. Perhaps Samuel needed someone to play the role of devoted wife, to deflect suspicion from the community about Rebecca's disappearance. Or perhaps he simply enjoyed the power of controlling another woman's fate. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Martha quickly hide the diary beneath her mattress and assume a casual position by the window. Samuel appeared in the doorway, his tall frame blocking most of the light from the hall. "Settling in well?" he asked, though his eyes were already scanning the room, searching for signs of disturbance. "Yes, thank you," Martha replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the terror coursing through her veins. "The room is lovely." Rebecca had excellent taste. Samuel's face darkened at the mention of his first wife's name. "Rebecca is gone," he said firmly. "I would prefer if we did not speak of her again. This is your home now, Martha. Your life begins here with me." The possessive tone in his voice made her skin crawl, but she nodded obediently. "Of course, I understand." But understanding and accepting were two very different things. That night, as Samuel retired to his room, Martha lay awake formulating a plan. She needed to find that gold Rebecca had mentioned, not because she wanted to steal it, but because it might be her only bargaining chip if Samuel discovered she knew the truth. The diary had mentioned an oak tree behind the barn, and Martha had noticed the ancient tree during her arrival. If she could locate the buried money, she might be able to use it as leverage to secure her own safety. The Montana night was cold and moonless, perfect for her purposes. Martha waited until she heard Samuel's snoring echo through the thin walls before creeping from her bed. She dressed quickly in her darkest clothing and made her way downstairs, avoiding the creaky floorboards she had noted during her earlier exploration of the house. The barn loomed like a sleeping giant against the star-studded sky. Behind it, the oak tree spread its gnarled branches wide, creating deep shadows that would conceal her activities. Martha had brought a small spade she found in the kitchen, though she hoped the gold wouldn't be buried too deeply. The ground beneath the oak was soft, recently disturbed. Someone had been digging here, and recently, Martha's spade struck something metallic after only a few minutes of work. Her heart leaped with excitement and terror as she uncovered a small iron box, its lock broken and hanging uselessly from the clasp. Inside, she found not gold, but something far more damning. Letters tied with red ribbon filled the container, along with a handful of official-looking documents. By moonlight, Martha could make out enough to understand their significance. The letters were correspondence between Samuel and a mine foreman named Dutch Carson, detailing their scheme to skim wages from the Silver Creek mining operation. The documents showed forged signatures and altered payroll records, evidence of systematic theft stretching back over 2 years. At the bottom of the box lay a small leather pouch that jingled with the weight of gold coins, probably samples of their ill-gotten gains. But where was the rest of the money Rebecca had written about? Martha was so absorbed in examining the contents of the box that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching until a shadow fell across her crouched form. She looked up to find Samuel standing over her, his face terrible in the moonlight. In his hands was the same shotgun Rebecca had mentioned in her final diary entry. "Curious little thing, aren't you?" Samuel's voice was soft, almost conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he had been shouting. "I wondered how long it would take you to find Rebecca's hiding. Real identity. She wasn't just another desperate woman seeking a fresh start. She was the daughter of one of the most famous detectives in the territory, and her disappearance would definitely be noticed. Seems to me a Pinkerton's daughter would know a thing or two about justice," Samuel continued, still addressing the corpse as much as the hidden Martha. "Probably came out here thinking she could solve all the world's problems with grit and determination. Well, James, we both know how that story ends, don't we?" Samuel began moving systematically through the brush, his shotgun ready. Martha knew her hiding place wouldn't conceal her for long, and the open prairie offered no better options. Her only chance lay in reaching the distant town of Copper Falls, but that was at least 10 miles away across open ground. As Samuel drew closer to her hiding spot, Martha made a desperate decision. She burst from cover and ran directly toward him, using his surprise to knock the shotgun from his hands. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the air as they struggled, Martha's small size working to her advantage in the close-quarters fight. But Samuel's superior strength quickly told, and he managed to pin her to the ground, his hands closing around her throat. "Should have stayed in Charleston," he gasped, his face twisted with rage. "Should have minded your own business like a proper woman." Martha's vision began to darken, but her hand found a sharp stone beside her head. With her last conscious effort, she drove it deep into Samuel's temple. He released her with a cry of pain and rage, blood flowing from the wound. Martha rolled away and struggled to her feet, gasping for air. Samuel wiped blood from his eyes and reached for his fallen shotgun. But Martha was already running again, this time toward his horse. She had grown up around horses on her father's small farm, and despite her terror, she managed to mount the animal and wheel it toward the distant mountains. Behind her, Samuel's curses echoed across the prairie, mixed with the sound of the shotgun's second barrel discharging. The bullet whistled past her ear, close enough to part her hair, but Martha was already out of range and riding hard for the high country. The horse was strong and well-trained, covering ground with long, smooth strides that ate up the miles between her and safety. But Martha knew Samuel wouldn't give up easily. He had killed twice to protect his secret, and he would certainly kill again rather than face the consequences of his crimes. The sun was well up by the time Martha reached the outskirts of Copper Falls, a rough mining town that existed primarily to service the claims scattered throughout the surrounding mountains. She rode directly to the sheriff's office, where a middle-aged man with a star on his vest looked up in surprise at her dramatic arrival. "Sheriff Morrison," Martha gasped, reading the name painted on his door. "I need your help. There's been a murder, maybe 2 murders, out at the Whitmore Ranch." Sheriff Morrison's face grew serious as Martha poured out her story, showing him her father's journal as proof of her identity. But as she spoke, she noticed something troubling in the lawman's expression. He seemed less surprised by her allegations than he should have been, and his questions focused more on what evidence she might have than on the crimes themselves. "Interesting story, Miss Henderson," the sheriff said when she finished. "Samuel Whitmore has been a pillar of this community for years. These are serious accusations you're making." Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "You don't believe me?" Sheriff Morrison's smile was cold and calculating. "Oh, I believe parts of your story, Miss Henderson. The parts about you trespassing on private property, destroying Mr. Whitmore's barn, and stealing his horse. The parts about murder and stolen gold." He shook his head. "Those sound like the ravings of a woman overcome by the hardships of frontier life." Too late, Martha realized that the sheriff's name was Morrison. James Morrison. The dead man at Miller's Creek was this lawman's son, and Samuel's corruption extended far beyond simple theft from the mines. Sheriff Morrison had been part of the scheme from the beginning, and James had died not for love, but because he had threatened to expose his own father's involvement in the criminal conspiracy. "James was your son," Martha whispered. Sheriff Morrison nodded slowly. "My boy got greedy, started talking about making things right, returning the money to its rightful owners. Samuel handled the problem in his usual efficient manner. The casual way he discussed his son's murder chilled Martha to the bone. Now I have a choice to make about you, Miss Henderson. Samuel wants you dead, but killing a Pinkerton's daughter might bring unwanted attention to our little operation." Martha's hand moved instinctively toward the hidden pocket in her dress, where she had concealed a small derringer throughout her ordeal. It was her father's backup weapon, a gift he had given her before his death. "I wouldn't," Sheriff Morrison said quietly, his own hand moving to his holster. "You're outnumbered and outgunned, and this town belongs to us." The door behind Martha opened, and Samuel Whitmore stepped inside, his temple still bleeding from her desperate blow. "Found her horse outside," he said conversationally. "Figured she might be here spinning tales about honest ranchers." Sheriff Morrison leaned back in his chair. Miss Henderson was just telling me about the tragic accident that befell her at your ranch, Samuel. How she got confused in the dark and accidentally set fire to your barn while trying to steal your horse. Samuel nodded approvingly. Terrible thing, confusion, can lead a person to all sorts of unfortunate ends. Martha realized she was trapped between two killers with no hope of escape through conventional means. But her father had taught her that desperate situations called for desperate measures. "Before you kill me," she said calmly, "you should know that I didn't come to Montana alone." Both men paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. "I am investigating several mail-order bride disappearances for the Pinkerton Agency," Martha continued, the lie flowing smoothly from her lips. "3 other women have vanished after responding to advertisements from Montana ranchers. My assignment was to determine if these disappearances were connected." Sheriff Morrison and Samuel exchanged worried glances. "You're lying," Samuel said, but doubt colored his voice. Martha reached slowly into her pocket, withdrawing not the derringer, but a folded piece of paper. "Telegraph from my supervisor in Chicago," she said, handing it to Sheriff Morrison. "Instructions to check in every 3 days. I'm already overdue for my first report." The paper was actually a grocery list from Charleston, but in the dim light of the sheriff's office, the men couldn't read the details clearly. Martha watched their faces as they absorbed the implications of federal investigators taking interest in their activities. "Even if that's true," Samuel said finally, "2 more bodies won't make much difference. We can make it look like you both died in an Indian raid. Happens all the time out here." But Sheriff Morrison was thinking more clearly than his partner. "Federal investigators don't just disappear, Samuel. They have resources, connections, people who will come looking. Killing her could bring the entire Pinkerton Agency down on us." Martha sensed an opportunity in their disagreement. "I can help you," she said quietly. "My report doesn't have to mention the Whitmore Ranch specifically. I could write that the missing women left the territory voluntarily, that there's no evidence of foul play. All I need is safe passage back to Chicago and your word that no more women will be harmed." Samuel's laugh was harsh and bitter. "And trust a Pinkerton to keep her word? I'd rather trust a rattlesnake." But Sheriff Morrison was nodding slowly. "It might work," he mused. "Clean up our operation, go back to simple mining claim disputes and cattle rustling. The big money was never worth this kind of risk anyway." Martha held her breath as the 2 men debated her fate. She could see Samuel's rage warring with Sheriff Morrison's pragmatism, and she knew her life hung in the balance of their criminal partnership. Finally, Sheriff Morrison made the decision. "We let her go," he said firmly. "But first, she helps us clean up the evidence. James's body gets a proper burial. Rebecca's remains get moved to the town cemetery with a nice headstone. Everything gets tied up neat and tidy." Samuel's face darkened with fury. "You're making a mistake, Morrison. She knows too much and she'll never stop digging. It's not in her nature." "Maybe not," the sheriff agreed. "But killing her guarantees we'll have federal agents crawling all over this territory within the month. At least this way we have a chance to disappear before anyone comes looking." Martha realized this might be her only opportunity for survival. "I agree to your terms," she said quickly. "Help me stage the scene properly, and I'll file a report that closes the case permanently." What followed was the most macabre day of Martha's life. Under the watchful eyes of Sheriff Morrison and Samuel Whitmore, she helped create an elaborate fiction to explain the disappearances of Rebecca and James. Rebecca's body was exhumed from its shallow grave behind the ranch house and reburied in the town cemetery with a headstone claiming she died of fever. James Morrison received a similar treatment, with his death attributed to a hunting accident. The stolen gold was carefully redistributed to make it appear that the missing money had been legitimate earnings, lost to bad investments rather than outright theft. Martha played her part perfectly, even helping to forge documents that would support their cover story. But throughout the charade, she was memorizing details, filing away evidence that could someday be used to bring these men to justice. As evening approached, Sheriff Morrison handed Martha a train ticket to Chicago and a small bag of traveling money. "You're part of the bargain," he said. Now keep yours. Martha nodded solemnly. The case will be officially closed within the week. You have my word. But as she boarded the eastbound train, Martha carried with her more than just the promise of safety. Hidden in the lining of her carpetbag were samples of the forged documents, photographs of James Morrison's body before it was moved, and detailed notes about the entire conspiracy. Her father had taught her that justice delayed was not justice denied, and sometimes the best revenge required patience and careful planning. 6 months later, a task force of federal marshals descended upon Copper Falls like an avenging angel. Armed with Martha's evidence and testimony, they arrested Sheriff Morrison, Samuel Whitmore, and a dozen other conspirators involved in the mining fraud. The trial made national headlines, with Martha's courage and determination praised in newspapers from New York to San Francisco. Samuel Whitmore was hanged for the murders of Rebecca and James Morrison. Sheriff Morrison received life in prison, where he died 3 years later under circumstances that were never fully explained. Martha Henderson returned to Chicago and became the first female detective officially employed by the Pinkerton Agency, specializing in cases involving crimes against women. She never married, but she lived a long and fulfilling life, always remembering the lessons learned during those terrifying days in the Montana Territory. The Whitmore Ranch was eventually sold to a family from Minnesota who turned it into a successful cattle operation. They say that sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, you can still hear echoes of the past carried on the Montana breeze. But those who know the truth understand that some secrets are too heavy to remain buried forever, and justice has a way of finding even the most carefully hidden crimes.